Madison Harper stepped off the plane at Chicago O'Hare International Airport with a mix of excitement and nervous energy that she hadn't felt in months. At 26, she had been working as a freelance graphic designer for 3 years, building her reputation one client at a time, one sleepless night after another. The endless cycle of deadlines, revisions, and chasing payments had left her feeling like she was drowning in her own ambition. This trip was supposed to be different. This was her chance to breathe again. The bustling terminal around her felt like a world away from her small apartment in Portland, Oregon, where she'd spent countless nights hunched over her laptop, surviving on coffee and determination. Madison had saved every penny for this getaway. 4 days in one of America's most vibrant cities, with nothing planned except wandering through museums, trying deep dish pizza, and maybe, just maybe, remembering who she was beneath all the stress and exhaustion. She pulled out her phone as she made her way through the crowded corridors, double-checking the address of her Airbnb rental. The listing had caught her eye immediately when she was browsing accommodations weeks earlier. The photos showed a modern, minimalist apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. The location was perfect. Walking distance to Millennium Park, the Art Institute, and dozens of restaurants she'd bookmarked on her food apps. But what had really sold her on the place were the reviews. Page after page of 5-star ratings, guests praising the cleanliness, the safety of the building, and the responsiveness of the host, someone who went by the name David Chen. Comments like, "Felt like home away from home," "Safest I've ever felt staying alone in a big city," and "David thought of everything," had eased her parents' concerns about their daughter traveling solo to such a large metropolitan area. The ride from the airport into the city gave Madison her first real taste of Chicago's energy. The skyline grew larger and more impressive with each mile, and she found herself pressing her face to the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The Uber driver, a friendly man in his 50s named Carlos, noticed her excitement. "First time in Chicago?" he asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Yes, and I can't believe how beautiful it is," Madison replied, her voice filled with genuine wonder. "I've seen it in movies, but this is incredible." Carlos smiled warmly. "You picked a good time to visit. Spring in Chicago is something special. Just make sure you're careful downtown, especially at night. Big city and all that." Madison nodded, though she felt confident about her choice of accommodation. The building her Airbnb was located in looked impressive in the photos. A modern residential complex with a doorman, security cameras, and what appeared to be a well-maintained lobby. She'd specifically chosen a place that prioritized safety, knowing that her mother, Susan, would worry herself sick if Madison stayed anywhere that seemed even remotely questionable. As they approached downtown, Madison's phone buzzed with a text message from David Chen, her host. "Welcome to Chicago. Your code for the smart lock is 7823. Apartment 14B elevator access card is on the kitchen counter. Hope you enjoy your stay." The message was professional yet warm, exactly what she'd come to expect from their brief exchanges during the booking process. David had been quick to respond to her questions about parking, nearby restaurants, and the best routes to the attractions she wanted to visit. He seemed to anticipate her needs before she even voiced them, which had impressed her and further validated her choice. The building stood tall and gleaming in the afternoon sun as Carlos pulled up to the curb. Madison paid her fare and tipped generously, gathering her single suitcase and backpack. The lobby was everything the photos had promised. Marble floors, modern furniture, and a front desk staffed by a professional-looking young man in a crisp uniform. "Excuse me," Madison approached the desk with a friendly smile. "I'm staying. In 14B for a few days. Just wanted to let you know I'd arrived." The desk clerk, whose name tag read James, looked up from his computer with a polite but somewhat confused expression. "I'm sorry, miss, but I don't have any record of guests expected for 14B today. Are you sure you have the right apartment number?" Madison felt a small flutter of confusion in her stomach. "Oh, I'm staying through Airbnb. The host is David Chen. Maybe he handles check-ins independently." James nodded slowly, his expression clearing. "Ah, that would explain it. Some of our residents do manage their own short-term rentals. Mr. Chen tends to handle everything digitally, so we don't always." Get advance notice, you should be all set with your access code. Something about the way James said it struck Madison as slightly odd, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what bothered her. Maybe it was the way he hesitated before mentioning David's preference for digital communication, or perhaps the fact that he seemed to know this detail about a resident's hosting style. She pushed the thought aside, attributing her unease to travel fatigue and the natural anxiety that came with staying somewhere new. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was smooth and quiet, giving Madison a moment to collect herself. She was proud of taking this trip alone, proud of overcoming the little voice in her head that whispered about all the things that could go wrong when a young woman traveled by herself to an unfamiliar city. Her parents had raised her to be independent and confident, but they'd also instilled a healthy sense of caution that sometimes felt more like fear. Apartment 14B was at the end of a well-lit hallway lined with identical dark doors. Madison found the smart lock exactly where David had described it and punched in the code. The soft beep and click of the lock disengaging felt like a small victory, a confirmation that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The door opened to reveal an apartment that was somehow even more impressive than the photos had suggested. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through those promised floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The space was impeccably clean and organized, with every piece of furniture positioned with geometric precision. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and the living area featured a comfortable-looking sofa, positioned perfectly to take advantage of the stunning city view. Madison set her suitcase down by the door and took a moment to absorb her surroundings. There was something almost museum-like about the perfection of the space, as if each object had been placed not just for function, but for visual impact. Even the throw pillows on the sofa seemed to be positioned at precisely calculated angles. She found the elevator access card exactly where David had said it would be, sitting on the pristine kitchen counter next to a small welcome basket containing bottled water, local snacks, and a handwritten note that read, "Dear Madison, welcome to Chicago. I hope you find everything you need for a comfortable stay. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Best wishes, David." The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed her heart, even as she noticed that the handwriting seemed oddly impersonal, almost mechanical in its uniformity. She photographed the note to show her parents later, knowing they'd appreciate seeing evidence of their daughter being well cared for. Madison pulled out her phone and composed a quick text to her parents. "Made it safely to Chicago. The apartment is absolutely beautiful and feels very secure. About to explore the neighborhood. Love you both." She hit send and immediately felt the familiar comfort that came from keeping her family in the loop. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with responses. Her mother wrote back, "So relieved to hear from you, sweetheart. Please check in regularly. Dad and I are already missing you." Her father's message was characteristically brief but warm. "Have fun, kiddo. Trust your instincts and call if you need anything." Madison smiled at their predictable responses. Her parents had been married for 32 years, and in that time, they developed distinct communication styles that somehow complemented each other perfectly. Her mother, Susan, was the worrier, the one who researched every potential danger and insisted on backup plans for backup plans. Her father, Robert, was more laid back but had taught Madison from a young age to listen to her intuition, to pay attention when something felt off. She spent the next hour unpacking and getting oriented in the space. The apartment had everything she could possibly need: fluffy towels, high-quality toiletries, a coffee maker with premium beans, and even a guidebook to Chicago with several pages bookmarked with what appeared to be David's personal recommendations. As evening approached, Madison decided to venture out for dinner. She'd spotted a charming Italian restaurant just a few blocks away during her research, and the walk would give her a chance to get a feel for the neighborhood. She gathered her purse and room key, taking one last look around the pristine apartment before heading out. The area around her building was everything she'd hoped for, bustling with life but not overwhelming, well-lit and clearly well-maintained. She passed couples walking hand in hand, families with children, and other tourists like herself, all contributing to an atmosphere that felt both exciting and safe. Dinner was exactly what she'd needed: comfort food that reminded her why, She'd been so excited about this trip in the first place. The restaurant's warm lighting and friendly servers made her feel welcome despite dining alone, and she found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. She even struck up a conversation with an elderly couple at the next table who were celebrating their anniversary, with a trip to Chicago from their farm in Iowa. "You picked a wonderful city for your first solo trip," the woman Eleanor told her with a knowing smile. "I remember my first adventure alone. Scariest and most liberating thing I'd ever done." Madison felt a surge of pride and confidence as she walked back to her building, taking the long way to soak in more of the city's energy. The doorman, a different person than the one she'd met earlier, nodded politely as she entered, and the elevator ride back to the 14th floor felt routine already. Back in the apartment, Madison settled onto the sofa with a cup of tea and her laptop, planning to research tomorrow's activities. The view from the windows was spectacular at night, with the city lights creating a tapestry of color and movement that made her feel like she was living inside a movie. She called her parents using FaceTime, wanting to share the view with them in real time. Her mother's face lit up when she saw the apartment, and her father whistled appreciatively at the city vista visible in the background. "You look happy, sweetheart," her mother observed. "Really happy. I can see it in your eyes." Madison realized her mother was right. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely excited about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. This trip was exactly what she'd needed to remember, that life was about more than just deadlines and client demands. "I feel like myself again," Madison admitted. "I'd forgotten how much I love exploring new places, meeting new people. This was such a good decision." Her parents beamed with pride, and after a few more minutes of conversation, Madison promised to call again tomorrow evening and said her good nights. She plugged her phone in to charge on the nightstand and prepared for bed, looking forward to waking up refreshed and ready for her first full day in Chicago. The apartment was remarkably quiet for being in the heart of such a bustling city. Madison had worried that street noise might keep her awake, but the windows seemed to block out most of the urban sounds, creating a peaceful sanctuary high above the activity below. As she brushed her teeth in the spotless bathroom, Madison caught sight of herself in the mirror and was surprised by what she saw. She looked younger somehow, more alive than she had in months. Her eyes had a sparkle that had been missing during those long nights of freelance work, and her posture reflected a confidence that felt both familiar and renewed. She slipped into comfortable pajamas and settled into the luxurious bed, pulling the high thread count sheets up to her chin. The mattress was perfectly firm, and the pillows seemed designed specifically for her sleeping preferences. Everything about this place felt tailored to create the ideal guest experience. Madison closed her eyes and let the gentle hum of the city far below lull her towards sleep. Tomorrow would bring the Art Institute, a walk through Millennium Park, and maybe even a boat tour of the Chicago River. For the first time in months, she was falling asleep, excited about what the next day would bring. But as sleep began to claim her, Madison couldn't quite shake the feeling that something about the apartment's perfection felt almost too good to be true. It was a thought so fleeting that she barely registered it before drifting off, trusting in the safety of her carefully chosen accommodation and the promise of adventure that lay ahead. Chapter 2. The morning sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows woke Madison naturally, without the harsh buzz of an alarm clock. For a moment she lay still, savoring the luxury of waking up slowly, without the immediate pressure of checking emails or rushing to meet a deadline. The view from the bed was breathtaking. Chicago's skyline stretched out before her like a promise of all the experiences waiting to be discovered. Madison reached for her phone to check the time and found several notifications. A good morning, text from her mother, asking if she'd slept well. A message from her best friend Emma back in Portland, demanding photos of everything. And, somewhat surprisingly, a message from David Chen that had arrived at 6:47 a.m. Good morning, Madison. Hope you slept comfortably. The weather should be perfect for sightseeing today. Remember, the building's coffee shop on the ground floor offers a 20% discount to residents. Just mention apartment 14B. Enjoy your day. The message struck her as wonderfully thoughtful, though she wondered how David knew she was planning to spend the day sightseeing. She supposed it was a reasonable assumption for someone on their first visit to Chicago, and the discount tip was genuinely helpful. She made a mental note to stop by the coffee shop on her way out. After a long, hot shower in the pristine bathroom, Madison felt completely refreshed and ready to tackle her carefully planned day. She'd always been someone who liked to have at least a loose itinerary when traveling, a trait she'd inherited from her methodical father. Today's plan included the Art Institute of Chicago, lunch in Millennium Park, and then perhaps some shopping along the Magnificent Mile. As she got dressed, Madison noticed how perfectly organized everything in the apartment remained. Even after unpacking her belongings the night before, the space somehow maintained its museum-like orderliness. Her toiletries on the bathroom counter looked almost artfully arranged, and her clothes in the bedroom somehow seemed to fall naturally into the same geometric precision that characterized the rest of the apartment. The coffee shop David had mentioned was tucked into a corner of the building's ground floor, staffed by a cheerful barista named Katie, who looked to be about Madison's age. When Madison mentioned she was staying in 14B, Katie's expression brightened with recognition. "Oh, you're one of David's guests. He's told us to take extra good care of anyone staying in his place. He's such a thoughtful host," Katie said, as she prepared Madison's latte with obvious care. "Are you here for business or pleasure?" "Just a much-needed vacation," Madison replied, accepting the perfectly crafted drink. "I'm a freelancer, so I don't get many chances to truly disconnect and explore somewhere new." Katie nodded knowingly. David mentioned he sometimes hosts people in creative fields. He said something about understanding the importance of having a peaceful space to recharge. She leaned closer conspiratorially. "Between you and me, he's probably the most considerate resident in the building, always thinking about ways to make people's stays special." As Madison walked toward the Art Institute, she found herself thinking about Katie's comments. David did seem remarkably attuned to his guests' needs, anticipating things that most hosts wouldn't even consider. The welcome basket, the local recommendations, the morning text with the coffee shop tip, it all pointed to someone who genuinely cared about providing an exceptional experience. The Art Institute was everything Madison had hoped it would be and more. She spent hours wandering through galleries, completely absorbed in the incredible collection. Art had always been her sanctuary, the thing that reminded her why she'd chosen a creative career path in the first place. Standing in front of paintings she'd only seen in textbooks felt like reconnecting with an old friend. During lunch in Millennium Park, Madison called her parents to share highlights from her morning. Her mother was delighted to hear about the art exhibits, and her father was impressed by her descriptions of the architecture she'd seen on her walk through downtown. "You sound so much more like yourself than you have in months," her mother observed, echoing the comment she'd made the night before. "Maybe this solo travel thing is exactly what you needed." Madison agreed wholeheartedly. She felt more creative, more inspired, and more confident than she had since starting her freelance career. The constant stress of managing her own business had gradually worn away her sense of adventure. But being here in Chicago was reminding her of who she used to be. The afternoon shopping expedition proved equally successful. Madison found a beautiful scarf that would be perfect for her mother's upcoming birthday, and a unique piece of artwork for her own apartment. She was particularly excited about the artwork, a small painting by a local Chicago artist that captured the energy and movement of the city in abstract form. As evening approached, Madison decided to try a different restaurant than the night. Before wanting to experience as much of Chicago's culinary scene as possible, she chose a cozy bistro that had caught her eye during her afternoon wandering, drawn by its warm lighting and the laughter she could hear drifting out onto the sidewalk. The bistro turned out to be another perfect choice. The food was exceptional, and Madison found herself in conversation with the couple at the table next to hers, Sarah and Michael, who were visiting from Minneapolis for their 10th wedding anniversary. They shared restaurant recommendations and compared notes about their favorite moments from their respective trips. "You're so brave to travel alone," Sarah told her with genuine admiration. "I keep saying I want to take a solo trip someday, but I can never quite work up the courage." "It's scary at first," Madison admitted, "but it's also incredibly empowering. You get to do exactly what you want, when you want, without having to consider anyone else's preferences or schedule. Michael nodded, approvingly. That's exactly what my sister says. She's been traveling solo for years and always comes back with the best stories and this amazing sense of confidence. Their conversation reinforced Madison's growing sense that this trip was marking some kind of turning point in her life. She was remembering parts of herself that had gotten buried under the stress of building her career, rediscovering the adventurous spirit that had driven her to pursue freelancing in the first place. The walk back to her building was pleasant and uneventful, though Madison found herself paying more attention to her surroundings than she had the night before. It wasn't fear exactly, but rather the heightened awareness that came with being alone in an unfamiliar city. She noticed the patterns of foot traffic, the locations of security cameras, the rhythm of the neighborhood's evening routine. Back in the apartment, Madison felt the same sense of sanctuary she'd experienced the night before. The space seemed to embrace her, offering the perfect environment for processing all the experiences and emotions of the day. She made herself a cup of tea and settled onto the sofa with her laptop, planning to upload the photos she'd taken and maybe do some preliminary research for tomorrow's adventures. As she scrolled through the images on her camera, Madison was struck by how happy she looked in the selfies she'd taken throughout the day. Her smile was genuine and unguarded, in a way that had become rare during the stress-filled months of building her freelance business. She selected the best photos to share with her parents and Emma, wanting them to see the transformation she was experiencing. Her evening FaceTime call with her parents was filled with excitement as she shared stories from her day and showed them her purchases. Her father was particularly interested in hearing about the Art Institute's architecture, while her mother wanted to know about every meal Madison had eaten and every person she'd met. "I'm so proud of you for taking this trip," her father said, as their call was winding down. "You've always been independent, but seeing you thrive on your own like this is really something special." Madison felt a warm glow of pride at his words. Her parents had always been supportive, but their approval of her solo adventure felt particularly meaningful. Growing up, they'd encouraged her to be self-reliant, while also making sure she understood the importance of staying connected to the people who loved her. After saying goodnight to her parents, Madison sent a few photos to Emma, who responded immediately with a string of heart-eye emojis and demands for more details. Their text conversation stretched on for nearly an hour, with Emma living vicariously through Madison's adventures, while sharing updates from their shared friend group back in Portland. "You need to do this more often," Emma texted. "Solo travel. Looks amazing on you. Maybe next time I'll be brave enough to join you for part of it." Madison smiled at the suggestion. She could already imagine planning future trips, using this Chicago experience as the foundation for bigger and bolder adventures. The confidence she was building here would serve her well in all aspects of her life, both personal and professional. As she prepared for bed, Madison reflected on how different this evening routine felt compared to her life back home. Instead of falling asleep worried about the next day's deadlines, she was drifting off excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. The apartment's perfect quiet seemed designed to promote exactly this kind of peaceful rest. She brushed her teeth in the spotless bathroom, noting again how remarkably clean everything remained despite her presence. It was as if the apartment had some kind of self-maintaining quality, though she knew David had probably hired an excellent cleaning service. The attention to detail really was extraordinary. Madison settled into the comfortable bed and reached for her phone to set an alarm for the morning. As she scrolled through her various apps to make sure everything was properly backed up and charged, she noticed something that struck her as mildly unusual. Her phone's location services showed that her device had been extremely active throughout the day, pinging location data much more frequently than usual. She frowned slightly, trying to remember if she'd changed any settings or downloaded any new apps that might cause increased location tracking. After a moment of consideration, she attributed it to being in an unfamiliar city, where her phone was constantly searching for the best cell towers and Wi-Fi connections. Urban environments could sometimes cause phones to work harder to maintain connectivity. Still, the observation left her with a tiny nagging feeling that she couldn't quite identify. It was nothing specific, just a small discordant note in what had otherwise been a perfectly harmonious day. Madison set her phone aside and pulled the luxurious sheets up to her chin, determined not to let such a minor concern overshadow the wonderful experiences she'd had. As sleep began to claim her, Madison's last conscious thought was gratitude for the opportunity to take this trip, for the safety and comfort of her accommodation, and for the reminder that she was capable of so much more than she'd been allowing herself to believe. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, and she was ready to embrace whatever the city had to offer. But deep in the building's infrastructure, in places Madison couldn't see or imagine, other things were stirring. Systems were recording, analyzing, and transmitting data that had nothing to do with her peaceful dreams or her plans for tomorrow. The apartment that felt so perfectly suited to her needs had been designed with purposes she couldn't begin to fathom, and her every movement was being observed by someone who understood far more about her than she could possibly realize. Chapter 3. Madison woke on her third morning in Chicago with a slight headache and an unusual sense of disorientation that took several minutes to shake off. She'd always been someone who woke up alert and ready to face the day, but this morning felt different somehow. Sluggish, as if she'd slept too deeply or for too long, though her phone showed she'd gotten exactly 8 hours of rest. She attributed the grogginess to the previous day's extensive walking and the rich dinner she'd enjoyed at the bistro. Urban exploration could be more physically demanding than people realized, and her body was probably still adjusting to the change in routine and environment. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows was as beautiful as ever, and the view of Chicago's skyline remained breathtaking. Madison took a moment to appreciate it while waiting for her head to fully clear, grateful once again for David's impeccable choice in accommodations. Her phone showed the now familiar good morning text from David. "Hope you're enjoying your stay. Today might be perfect for the lakefront. The weather is supposed to be ideal for walking along Lake Michigan. The building's concierge can provide maps and recommendations if needed. Have a wonderful day." The message was as thoughtful as always, though Madison found herself wondering how David seemed to know exactly what kind of activities would appeal to her. The lakefront had indeed been on her list of places to explore, but she was certain she hadn't mentioned it in any of their communications. Perhaps he was simply good at reading his guests' interests based on their booking patterns and stated reasons for visiting. As Madison got ready for the day, she noticed something that struck her as odd. The clothes she'd worn yesterday were perfectly folded and placed on the chair in the bedroom, though she was certain she'd left them in a casual pile before going to bed. The neat arrangement looked almost professional, as if someone had carefully prepared them for storage. She stood staring at the folded clothes for a long moment, trying to remember if she might have folded them herself in a moment of late-night tidiness. The headache was making it difficult to think clearly, and she couldn't quite recall her exact routine before falling asleep. It was possible she'd been more organized than usual without really registering the action. Madison shook her head, dismissing the concern. She was probably overthinking things because she wasn't used to staying in such an immaculately maintained space. David clearly took enormous pride in providing a pristine environment for his guests, and it was natural that this attention to detail would extend to small touches she might not even notice. The coffee shop visit that had become part of her morning routine provided its usual boost of energy and caffeine. Katie, the friendly barista, greeted her with the same warm smile as before. "How's your stay going so far?" Katie asked as she prepared Madison's usual latte. "David mentioned you were really enjoying the city." Madison paused mid-reach for her wallet. "David mentioned that? When did you speak with him?" "Oh, he stops by pretty regularly to check on things," Katie replied casually. "He's very hands-on about making sure his guests are having a good experience. He was asking yesterday if you seemed to be settling in well." This information sat uncomfortably with Madison, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. There was nothing inherently strange about a host checking in with building staff about a guest's well-being. In fact, it demonstrated the same level of care and attention that had impressed her about David's hosting style from the beginning. But something about the timing felt off. She'd been exploring the city during most of yesterday, and David's text messages had been sent at times when she was clearly away from the building. How had he known? To check with Katie about her well-being, unless he was monitoring her comings and goings more closely than she'd realized. Madison accepted her coffee with a smile, deciding not to pursue the topic further. She was probably reading too much into what was simply conscientious hosting. David was obviously someone who took his responsibilities seriously, and his proactive approach was part of what made this Airbnb experience so exceptional. The walk to Lake Michigan was every bit as beautiful as David had suggested. The weather was indeed perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze, and temperatures that made walking a genuine pleasure. Madison spent the morning exploring the lakefront, taking photos of the water and the city skyline, and feeling grateful for the recommendation that had led her to this spectacular area. Around midday, she decided to call her parents from one of the scenic overlooks, wanting to share the view with them in real time. Her mother answered on the second ring, and her face lit up when she saw the lake stretching out behind Madison. "Oh, sweetheart, it's absolutely gorgeous," her mother exclaimed. "You look so healthy and happy. This trip is doing you so much good." Madison agreed, though she found herself mentioning the morning's grogginess and the strangely folded clothes. Her mother listened with the focused attention she brought to any concern involving her daughter's welfare. "Have you been drinking?" "Enough water?" her mother asked, immediately shifting into caretaker mode. "And eating regularly? Sometimes when we're excited about exploring, we forget to take care of the basics." "I think so," Madison replied, though she realized she couldn't clearly remember everything she'd eaten the day before. The headache seemed to be affecting her memory in small but noticeable ways. "I probably just need to pace myself better. I've been trying to see everything at once." Her father's face appeared on the screen as he joined the conversation. "Remember what I always told you about trusting your instincts," he said, his expression more serious than usual. "If something feels off, don't ignore it, just because you can't explain it logically." Madison nodded, though she wasn't sure what instincts she was supposed to be trusting. Everything about her experience in Chicago had been positive. The apartment was beautiful, the location was perfect, and David's hosting had been exemplary. Her concerns felt more like travel fatigue than genuine warning signs. After ending the call, Madison decided to head back toward downtown for lunch, planning to spend the afternoon at the Museum of Contemporary Art. But as she walked, she found herself paying more attention to her surroundings than she had before. Not from fear, but from a growing awareness that she might not be as observant as she'd thought. How many people had she passed without really seeing them? How many details of her environment had she missed while focusing on the bigger picture? The realization made her feel slightly vulnerable, as if she'd been moving through the city with less awareness than a solo traveler should maintain. Lunch at a small cafe near the museum gave Madison a chance to rest and reflect on her father's words about trusting her instincts. She'd always prided herself on being intuitive, on picking up on subtle cues that others might miss. But the stress of building her freelance career had worn away some of that natural awareness, leaving her more focused on external goals than internal wisdom. Maybe that was part of what this trip was meant to restore. Not just her sense of adventure, but her connection to her own inner voice. The voice that had guided her through childhood challenges, college decisions, and career changes. The voice that had been gradually quieted by the constant noise of deadlines and client demands. The Museum of Contemporary Art proved to be exactly what Madison needed. A space where she could lose herself in creativity while also sharpening her observational skills. She spent hours studying the exhibits, not just looking at the art, but paying attention to how other visitors moved through the space, how the lighting affected her mood, how different pieces made her feel both intellectually and emotionally. By the time she emerged from the museum, Madison felt more centered and alert than she had all morning. The headache had completely disappeared, and her thinking felt clear and sharp again. Perhaps she'd simply needed to give her brain something substantial to focus on after 2 days of pure leisure. The walk back to her building took her through a different neighborhood than she'd explored before, giving her a chance to see more of Chicago's diverse character. She stopped at a small market to buy snacks and bottled water, determined to follow her mother's advice about taking better care of her basic needs. As she approached her building, Madison noticed a man standing across the street, who seemed to be watching the entrance. He was dressed casually, jeans, baseball cap, dark jacket, and there was nothing overtly suspicious about his presence, but something about his stillness caught her attention. While everyone else On the busy street was clearly in motion, going somewhere with purpose. This man appeared to be waiting. Madison slowed her pace slightly, using the reflection in a store window to observe him more carefully. He appeared to be of medium height and build, though the cap obscured his features. As she watched, he pulled out his phone and seemed to be taking a photo or recording a video in the direction of her building. The observation sent a small chill down Madison's spine, though she tried to rationalize it away. Chicago was a tourist destination, and people took photos of interesting buildings all the time. The man could be a tourist like herself, documenting his visit to the city, or he could be a real estate agent, a photographer, or any number of professionals who might have legitimate reasons to photograph urban architecture. But her father's voice echoed in her mind, "Trust your instincts." And her instincts were telling her that this felt different from casual photography. There was something deliberate and focused about the man's attention that suggested a specific purpose rather than general interest. Madison decided to test her theory. Instead of heading directly into her building, she continued walking past it, as if it hadn't been her destination at all. In the reflection of windows and parked car mirrors, she watched to see if the man's attention would follow her or remain fixed on the building. His gaze followed her. The realization made Madison's heart rate spike with a combination of fear and validation. She'd been right to trust her instincts, but being right didn't make the situation any less concerning. She was a young woman alone in an unfamiliar city, and someone appeared to be watching her movements. Madison continued walking for another block before ducking into a coffee shop where she could observe the street through the window while considering her options. The man hadn't followed her this far, but she could still see him in the distance, back in his original position across from her building. She pulled out her phone and considered calling her parents, but hesitated. What would she tell them? That someone might be watching her building, that she had a feeling something wasn't quite right. They'd insist she come home immediately, and she wasn't even certain there was a real threat. Instead, Madison decided to wait. She ordered another coffee and settled into a window seat where she could monitor the situation without being obvious about it. If the man was still there after 20 or 30 minutes, she'd know her concerns were justified. If he left, she could probably dismiss the incident as an overactive imagination. 25 minutes later, the man was still there, still watching, still waiting. Madison's hands were trembling slightly as she pulled out her phone to call David. As her host, he would know if there were any security concerns she should be aware of. He might even be able to contact building security to check on the situation. But when she tried to call the number David had provided, it went directly to voicemail. His greeting was brief and professional. "You've reached David Chen. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." "Hi David, this is Madison Harper from 14B, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm calling because there's a man across the street from the building who appears to be watching it, and I'm not sure if I should be concerned. Could you please call me back when you get this message? Thanks." After ending the call, Madison continued her vigil from the coffee shop window. The man remained in position for another 15 minutes before finally walking away, disappearing into the evening crowd with the same casual pace he'd maintained throughout his surveillance. Madison waited another 10 minutes to be sure he was really gone before making her way back to the building. James was at the front desk again, and his warm greeting helped ease some of her anxiety. "Excuse me," Madison said as she approached the desk. "I wanted to ask if you'd noticed anyone unusual watching the building this evening. A man in a baseball cap and dark jacket." James's expression grew more serious. "I can't say I noticed anyone specific, but we do get people who linger sometimes, usually harmless. Tourists taking photos, people waiting for friends. Was he bothering you?" "Not directly," Madison replied. "He just seemed to be watching for a long time, and when I walked past, his attention followed me rather than staying on the building." "That does sound concerning," James agreed. "Would you like me to review the exterior camera footage? We can usually get a good look at anyone who's been hanging around outside." Madison felt a wave of relief at his offer. "That would be wonderful. I'm probably overreacting, but I'd feel better knowing for sure." James spent several minutes reviewing footage on his computer while Madison waited. His expression remained neutral until he reached a certain point in the recording, when his brow furrowed slightly. "This is odd," he said, turning the monitor so Madison could see. "The camera was functioning normally all day, but there's a gap in the recording during the time period you're describing, about a 40-minute window where we don't have footage." Madison felt her anxiety spike again. "Is that normal? Technical problems with the cameras?" "Not really," James admitted. "Our system is pretty reliable. It's possible there was a signal interference issue, but the timing is certainly coincidental." The implications of this information settled over Madison like a cold weight. Someone had been watching her building during the exact time period when the security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. Either she was experiencing an incredible series of coincidences, or someone was deliberately creating blind spots in the building's security. "Should I call the police?" Madison asked, though she dreaded the conversation she'd have to have with her parents if she took that step. James considered the question carefully. It might not hurt to file a report just to have it on record, but without footage or any direct interaction, there might not be much they can do immediately. "I'll definitely keep an eye out for anyone matching that description, and I'll mention it to the evening shift when they come in." Madison thanked James and headed up to her apartment, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, and she found herself studying her reflection in the polished doors, wondering if she looked as unsettled as she felt. Back in the apartment, the familiar sense of sanctuary was missing. The space felt the same. Perfectly clean, beautifully arranged, wonderfully quiet. But Madison's awareness had shifted. Instead of feeling protected by the apartment's isolation, she found herself wondering about all the things she couldn't see or control. She double-checked the locks on the door and made sure the privacy chain was engaged before settling onto the sofa with her phone. David still hadn't returned her call, which was unusual given his previous responsiveness. She sent him a text message repeating her concerns and asking him to contact her as soon as possible. Madison's evening routine felt different now, colored by the lingering unease from her encounter with the watching man. Every sound from the hallway made her pause and listen. Every shift in the building's normal nighttime settling made her heart rate increase slightly. When she called her parents for their nightly check-in, Madison found herself downplaying the day's events. She mentioned the beautiful lakefront and the contemporary art museum, but she didn't share her concerns about being watched or the gap in the security footage. She told herself she was protecting them from unnecessary worry, but part of her knew she was also protecting herself from their inevitable insistence that she come home immediately. "You sound a little tired tonight," her mother observed with the keen perception that had guided Madison through childhood scrapes and teenage dramas. "Just a full day of exploring," Madison replied, which was true even if it wasn't the complete truth. "I think I'm finally hitting that point where my body is demanding some rest." Her father's voice came through clearly. "Remember what we talked about earlier. If your instincts are telling you something, listen to them." Madison promised she would, though she wasn't entirely sure what her instincts were telling her anymore. The watching man had felt threatening, but he was gone now. The camera malfunction was suspicious, but it could have been a legitimate technical issue. David's lack of response was unusual, but hosts couldn't be available 24 hours a day. Each individual concern had a rational explanation, but together they formed a pattern that made Madison increasingly uncomfortable. She was probably being paranoid, but her father had always taught her that a little paranoia was better than a lot of regret. As Madison prepared for bed, she found herself checking and double-checking the apartment's security features. The door locks, the window, latches, the privacy chain. Everything seemed secure, but she couldn't shake the feeling that security was more complex than simple mechanical barriers. Before turning off the lights, Madison sent one more text to David. "Still haven't heard back from you. Getting a bit concerned about some security issues. Please call when you can." She placed her phone on the nightstand and settled into the comfortable bed, but sleep felt elusive despite her exhaustion. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. The hum of the building's systems, the distant traffic, the occasional footstep in the hallway. Madison closed her eyes and tried to focus on her breathing, using relaxation techniques she'd learned during the stressful early days of her freelance career. Gradually, her body began to relax, and the events of the day started to fade into the soft fog of approaching sleep. But just as she was drifting off, Madison heard something that made her eyes snap open. A soft sound, barely audible, that seemed to come from somewhere inside the apartment. Not from the hallway or the neighboring units, but from somewhere much closer. It sounded like a door opening. Chapter 4. Madison lay perfectly still in the darkness, every muscle in her body tense with listening. The sound had been so soft, so brief that she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. But her father's voice echoed in her mind again. Trust your instincts. And her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. She held her breath and strained to hear any other sounds, but the apartment had returned to its usual perfect silence. No footsteps, no movement, nothing that would indicate another person's presence. Yet the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, grew stronger with each passing second. Madison reached slowly for her phone on the nightstand, her movements deliberate and quiet. The screen's glow seemed blindingly bright in the darkness, and she quickly dimmed it while navigating to her contacts. Her thumb hovered over her father's number, then moved to 911, then back to her father. What would she tell them? That she'd heard a door open? That she felt like someone was in the apartment? Without proof, without seeing anything concrete, she'd sound like a paranoid tourist, letting her imagination run wild in an unfamiliar place. But the feeling wouldn't go away. If anything, it was getting stronger. Madison forced herself to think logically. If there really was someone in the apartment, what would be her best course of action? The bedroom door was closed, but not locked. The main apartment door was at least 30 feet away past the living room and kitchen. Her phone had full signal, so she could call for help, but help might not arrive in time if her fears were justified. She needed to see what was happening, but safely. Moving with infinite care, Madison eased herself out of bed and crept toward the bedroom door. The hardwood floors that had seemed so elegant during the day now presented a minefield of potential creaks and groans. She tested each step before putting her full weight down, grateful for the thick area rug that muffled her movements. At the bedroom door, Madison pressed her ear against the wood and listened. The silence beyond was complete, but it felt different somehow. Occupied, as if the very air in the apartment was holding its breath along with her. She slowly turned the handle and opened the door just wide enough to peer through the crack. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the city lights filtering through those floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a patchwork of light and shadow that made it difficult to distinguish shapes clearly. Everything appeared normal. The sofa, the coffee table, the kitchen counter, all exactly as she'd left them. But Madison's eyes were drawn to something that made her heart stop. The tall armoire against the far wall was slightly open, revealing a dark gap that hadn't been there when she went to bed. Madison was certain, absolutely certain, that the armoire had been closed when she'd done her final security check of the apartment. She'd specifically noticed it because it was one of the few pieces of furniture that could potentially conceal a person, and she'd made sure it was secure before settling in for the night. Now, it stood partially open, like a mouth preparing to speak. Madison gripped her phone tighter, her thumb already moving toward the emergency call button. But before she could dial, she heard it again. The soft sound of a door opening. Not from the armoire this time, but from somewhere behind it. As Madison watched in frozen terror, a section of the wall behind the armoire began to move inward, revealing a hidden passage she never could have imagined. The opening was small, perhaps 3 feet wide, but large enough for a person to move through comfortably. A figure emerged from the hidden space, moving with the careful silence of someone who had done this many times before. The person was dressed in dark clothing and wore what appeared to be a black mask that covered their entire head. They carried something in their hands, a small device that glowed softly in the darkness. Madison's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a random break-in, this was planned, deliberate, sophisticated. Someone had built a secret entrance into this apartment, someone who could come and go without using the main door or being seen by building security. The masked figure moved through the apartment with obvious familiarity, checking various locations with the efficiency of someone following a well-practiced routine. Madison watched in horrified fascination as they approached her laptop on the coffee table, connected some kind of device to it, and waited while information was apparently transferred. The realization hit Madison like a physical blow. She was being watched, recorded, studied. Everything about her stay, her movements, her communications, her personal information was being monitored and collected by someone who had sophisticated access to this apartment. David Chen wasn't just an overly attentive host. He was something else entirely. Madison's hands were shaking so violently that she nearly dropped her phone as she tried to dial 911. The masked figure was still occupied with her laptop, but she knew this window of opportunity wouldn't last long. Once they finished their current task, they might discover that she was awake and aware of their presence. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is in my apartment, Madison whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. I'm staying at an Airbnb in downtown Chicago, and there's a person with a mask who came through a hidden door. I'm hiding in the bedroom. Can you give me the address? The operator asked, her voice calm and professional. Madison provided the building address and apartment number, grateful that she'd memorized both during her careful travel preparations. The person is still here, she continued. They have some kind of equipment, and they're doing something to my laptop. Officers are being dispatched to your location, the operator assured her. Stay on the line with me and try to remain as quiet as possible. Do not confront the intruder. Is there a way for you to secure yourself in the room where you are? Madison looked around the bedroom, searching for anything she could use to barricade the door. The furniture was beautiful but not particularly heavy or movable. There's not much I can use, she whispered back. The door doesn't have a lock. That's okay. Just stay hidden and stay quiet. Help is on the way. Through the crack in the door, Madison continued to watch the masked figure's movements. They had finished with her laptop and were now examining other items in the living area. Her purse, her camera, even the guidebook she'd been using to plan her activities. Everything was being photographed or scanned with that small device. The calm, methodical nature of the search suggested this wasn't about theft in any conventional sense. The figure wasn't taking anything, just documenting and recording. Madison realized with growing horror that her entire stay had probably been under this kind of surveillance. Every conversation she'd had in the apartment, every personal item she'd unpacked, every moment she'd thought she was alone, all of it had been observed and recorded. The masked figure moved toward the kitchen area, and Madison could see them opening drawers and cabinets with the same systematic approach. They knew exactly where everything was located, confirming that this wasn't their first time in the apartment. How many other guests had been subjected to this violation? How many people had stayed here thinking they were safe while being monitored and studied? Madison's phone buzzed with a text message, and she nearly cried out in surprise before catching herself. The message was from David Chen. Sorry for the delayed response. Everything okay with your stay? The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Somehow David knew that Madison was awake and aware of what was happening. The text was either a cruel joke or an attempt to maintain his cover story even in the face of discovery. Madison typed back quickly, "Call 911. Someone is in the apartment." The response came immediately. "I'm sure everything is fine, probably just building maintenance. They sometimes need access for emergency repairs." The gaslighting was so blatant, so insulting, that Madison felt a surge of anger cut through her terror. David wasn't even pretending anymore. He knew that she knew, and he was counting on her doubting her own perceptions. Madison took a screenshot of the text exchange and sent it to her parents with a brief message. "Call police. Something wrong at Airbnb. I'm okay, but need help." Almost immediately, her phone rang. It was her father, and Madison could hear the fear and determination in his voice, even though she couldn't answer the call without potentially alerting the intruder. She let it go to voicemail and texted back, "Can't talk. Police coming. I love you later." Through the bedroom door crack, Madison could see that the masked figure had moved closer to her location. They were now examining the hallway area, and their path would inevitably lead them to the bedroom where she was hiding. Madison retreated from the door and pressed herself against the far wall, her phone clutched to her chest. The 911 operator was still on the line, providing updates about the officer's arrival time and offering reassurance in a steady, calming voice. "They should be entering the building now," the operator said. "You've done everything right. Just stay where you are." Madison could hear new sounds from the main part of the apartment, not the careful silence of the masked figure, but the heavier footsteps and authoritative voices of law enforcement. The cavalry had arrived. "Chicago police, if there's anyone in this apartment, make yourself known immediately." The response was immediate and chaotic. Madison heard rapid footsteps, the sound of furniture being moved, and what sounded like the hidden door slamming shut. The masked figure was trying to escape the way they'd entered. "Madison Harper, this is the Chicago police. Are you in here?" "So in the bedroom," Madison called out, her voice stronger now that help had arrived. The person went back through the wall behind the big armoire. The bedroom door opened, and Madison found herself face to face with two uniformed officers who quickly assessed her condition and the security of the room. Their presence felt like the most wonderful thing she'd ever experienced. "Are you injured?" the first officer asked. "Did the intruder have any contact with you?" "No, I don't think they knew I was awake until just now," Madison replied, though her voice was shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. "But I saw everything. They came through a hidden door and they were doing something to my laptop and other belongings." The second officer was already speaking into his radio, calling for additional units and what sounded like a specialized search team. "We're going to need to process this entire apartment as a crime scene," he told Madison, "and we'll need to search for this hidden access point you described." Over the next several hours, Madison's safe, beautiful Airbnb was transformed into the center of a major investigation. Crime scene technicians arrived with equipment that revealed the sophisticated nature of what had been happening in apartment 14B. The hidden door behind the armoire was just the beginning. As investigators examined the space more carefully, they discovered a network of concealed cameras throughout the apartment, 7 in total, positioned to capture every area where a guest might spend time. The cameras were so well disguised that Madison never would have noticed them without knowing exactly where to look. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, the lead investigator on the case, sat down with Madison in the building's conference room to get her full statement. Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately put Madison at ease. "What you discovered tonight is part of something much larger than a simple privacy violation," Rodriguez explained. "We've been tracking reports of similar incidents at other short-term rental properties around the city, but this is the first time we've caught someone in the act." Madison felt a chill as the implications sank in. How many other people have been violated like this? "We're still investigating, but based on what we found in the hidden space behind your apartment, potentially dozens of guests over the past several years," Rodriguez replied. The setup was extremely sophisticated. Not just cameras, but data collection equipment, network servers, the works. The hidden space, which investigators accessed through the building's maintenance areas, contained a small but highly advanced surveillance operation. Banks of monitors, computer servers, and storage devices, containing hundreds of hours of recorded footage from multiple apartments in different buildings across the city. "David Chen isn't one person," Rodriguez continued. "It's an identity used by an organized group that's been running this operation across multiple properties. They create fake listings, establish legitimate-seeming rental histories, and then use the properties to collect data on their guests." Madison felt sick as she thought about all the personal information that had been gathered during her stay. Her laptop contained her business files, personal communications, financial information, everything someone would need to steal her identity or exploit her in numerous ways. "What were they planning to do with all that information?" she asked. "We're still investigating, but it appears to be a combination of identity theft, financial fraud, and something we're calling lifestyle profiling," Rodriguez explained. They were collecting detailed information about their victims' habits, relationships, vulnerabilities, and fears. Information that could be used for targeted scams, blackmail, or other forms of exploitation. The detective showed Madison some of the equipment that had been recovered from the hidden space, devices she'd never seen before, capable of intercepting communications, copying data, and even monitoring health information through smartphone sensors. The level of sophistication suggests this operation had significant funding and technical expertise, Rodriguez added. This wasn't amateur hour. These people knew exactly what they were doing. As dawn broke over Chicago, Madison found herself in a surreal situation, sitting in a police station, giving statements about an experience that felt more like a nightmare than reality. Her parents had caught the first available flight from Portland and were en route to Chicago, though Madison had assured them she was physically unharmed. The apartment that had felt like such a perfect sanctuary just hours earlier was now a crime scene, sealed off with police tape and crawling with investigators. Madison's belongings were being processed as evidence, though Rodriguez assured her everything would be returned once the forensic examination was complete. I keep thinking about all the little things that seemed odd, but that I explained away, Madison told Rodriguez during a break in the questioning. The way David always seemed to know exactly what I was planning to do, how the building staff knew details about my stay, the man watching the building yesterday. Rodriguez nodded knowingly. That's exactly how these operations work. They create an environment where the victim's instincts are constantly being triggered. But each individual incident has a plausible explanation. It's only when you see the whole picture that the pattern becomes clear. The detective explained that the watching man Madison had noticed was likely a lookout, monitoring the building for any signs that their operation had been discovered. The gap in the security camera footage wasn't a technical malfunction. It was deliberate sabotage designed to create a window of opportunity for surveillance activities. You did everything right, Rodriguez assured her. You trusted your instincts. You documented what you observed, and you called for help when you realized you were in danger. A lot of people might have convinced themselves they were being paranoid. As the morning progressed, more details of the operation became clear. The real apartment 14B belonged to an elderly woman who had no idea her home was being used for illegal purposes. The fake David Chen had somehow gained access to the building's systems and created a parallel rental operation that existed entirely in the digital realm. The building's actual management company was cooperating fully with the investigation, shocked to discover that their security had been compromised so thoroughly. James, the friendly desk clerk, was as much a victim as Madison. He'd been given false information about the rental arrangements and had unknowingly participated in maintaining the cover story. Madison's parents arrived at the police station just as she was finishing her formal statement. The reunion was emotional and overwhelming, with her mother crying tears of relief and her father struggling to contain his anger at the people who had put his daughter in danger. "I should have listened more carefully when you called yesterday," her mother said, holding Madison tightly. "I should have told you to come home immediately." "You couldn't have known," Madison replied. "None of us could have known." These people were experts at making everything seem normal and safe. Her father's response was more direct. "Your instincts saved you. If you hadn't been paying attention, if you hadn't trusted that something was wrong, this could have ended very differently." Detective Rodriguez provided Madison and her parents with comprehensive information about identity protection, credit monitoring, and other steps they should take to safeguard against potential misuse of the stolen information. The investigation was ongoing, and there would likely be additional questions and court proceedings in the months ahead. The good news is that we caught this operation before they had a chance to act on most of the information they collected, Rodriguez explained. The bad news is that operations like this one are becoming more common as technology makes surveillance easier and more sophisticated. Madison spent one more night in Chicago, but in a legitimate hotel recommended by the EE Police Department. Her parents stayed in an adjoining room, and for the first time since arriving in the city, Madison felt genuinely safe and protected. As she lay in the hotel bed, processing everything that had happened, Madison realized that this experience had taught her something crucial about the balance between adventure and safety. She'd been right to trust her instincts, right to pay attention to the small details that didn't quite add up. The confidence she'd been building during her solo trip hadn't been misplaced. It had been what saved her, her ability to observe, to question, to trust her own perceptions had protected her from becoming another victim in a sophisticated criminal operation. The next morning, as Madison and her parents prepared to fly back to Portland, Detective Rodriguez called with an update. 3 arrests had been made in connection with the surveillance operation, and evidence had been found linking the group to similar crimes in 5 other cities. "Your case is going to help a lot of other victims get justice," Rodriguez told her, "and it's going to help us shut down operations like this one before they can hurt more people." Madison felt a complex mix of emotions as their plane lifted off from Chicago. The city that had represented adventure and independence would now forever be associated with violation and fear, but it had also become the place where she'd discovered the strength of her own voice, the reliability of her own instincts. The freelance career that had brought her to the edge of exhaustion suddenly seemed less important than the deeper questions this experience had raised. How many other people were being watched and violated in ways they couldn't even imagine? How could someone protect themselves in a world where predators had access to increasingly sophisticated tools? Madison knew that her story was far from over. There would be trials, testimony, and the ongoing work of helping other victims understand what had happened to them. But there would also be a return to travel, to adventure, to the kind of independence that had drawn her to solo exploration in the first place. The difference now was that she would trust herself completely. No more explaining away instincts, no more dismissing concerns as paranoia. Her inner voice had proven itself worthy of her attention, and she would never again let external pressures override her own perception of safety and danger. As the plane carried her home to Portland, Madison began planning her next adventure. This time she would research more carefully, verify more thoroughly, and trust her instincts from the very first moment something felt off. She had learned that true confidence came not from ignoring potential dangers, but from developing the skills and awareness to navigate them successfully. The Madison Harper who landed in Portland was different from the one who had left 5 days earlier. She was still creative, still adventurous, still determined to build the life she wanted. But now she was also wise, aware, and unshakably confident in her own ability to protect herself in an uncertain world. Her story became a cautionary tale, shared in travel forums and safety websites, helping other solo travelers understand the sophisticated threats they might face. But more importantly, it became a testament to the power of trusting yourself, of listening to the quiet voice that knows when something isn't right, even when everything appears to be perfect. If this story has touched your heart or made you think about your own travel safety, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with others who might benefit from Madison's experience. Please subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that explore the resilience of the human spirit in the face of danger. Leave a comment below sharing your own thoughts about trusting your instincts. Your story might help someone. Stay safe. And remember, the most important travel companion you'll ever have is your own inner wisdom. Listen to it, trust it, and never let anyone convince you to ignore what your heart is telling you.